Good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you might be. My name is Kevin Michael Grace, and this is the KMG show for Thursday, March the 11th, 2021. I'll just have to apologize in advance if I sound or look a little rattled today. It's because I am. I've mentioned previously that directly across the street from this room, there is what was formerly a motel, Paul's Motor Inn, which has been turned into a homeless shelter. And the police are there every day. And I'm woken up several times in the middle of the night by people screaming or blasting their car stereos at maximum value, dogs barking, that sort of thing. This afternoon, a little earlier this afternoon, there was a man about 12 yards away from where I am now who was screaming death threats for an hour, threatening to kill everyone in the homeless shelter, and also threatening to burn it down and to burn down all of the other buildings in the vicinity. He would pace back and forth and then come back to his collection of bags. And strangely enough, the people coming to and fro out of this place weren't paying him any attention at all. I guess they've just gotten used to that sort of thing. It's the new normal, as they say. So I spoke to the clerk at the desk, and he said that he would call the non-emergency line for the Victoria Police. And about half an hour later, two female bicycle cops showed up and talked to this fellow, I don't know, for about 15, 20 minutes. And he kept making aggressive gestures at them, like this sort of thing. He wasn't that far away either. Also mimicking shooting someone with a gun. Eventually, he wandered off a little to the left, and with his bags, and there were a bunch of people with him, and I thought he was going to get in a car and drive away. Apparently he didn't. I saw him a little after that in the parking lot of this hotel, bent over a broken wall. So he was like bent in half, and he seemed rather spent, I suppose you could say. But he's back in the parking lot of Paul's Motor Inn, and walking back and forth. And we're not getting the death threats. We're not quite up to that level yet. Just a torrent of profanity directed at the world. So we'll see how that plays out. Hello to Palcaso 88, Dan, Tom Anderson, Professor Paul Quachalango. To Buddy and Run. This sounds like something out of Taxi Driver era New York City. Sorry, Kevin. Well, yeah, it is rather like that, except we're not up to the murder level yet. Hello to William Hicks. Push that bureau against your door before you go to sleep and tie the sheets into a rope to throw out the window. Well, I am on the second floor here. So I don't think there's a problem of anyone getting in. Buddy says, I'm going to get a t-shirt that says good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you might be. Well, maybe I could get into that business like Brooklyn Dad Defiant, or Brooklyn Bot Compliant, as I call him. The latest that I read about that fellow is that his moniker, Brooklyn Dad Defiant, doesn't have anything to do with politics. It has to do with his children and or his ex or exes. And apparently he was one of these men's rights activists complaining that he had been burned by the courts. And also, I found this out myself. I didn't think it worth mentioning. Apparently he used to live in Brooklyn, but now lives in New Jersey. Who will be Victoria's Travis Bickle, says Tom Anderson. Well, I hope it's not me. I hope it's not me. The first subject today is woke apocalypse. And I wanted to begin by talking about one of the great writers of the 20th century, and his name was Michael Wharton, originally Michael Nathan. And he adopted the persona in the Daily Telegraph of Peter Simple from a famous naval novel of the past. And at the Groenmark blog, I found a tribute to him. And he says that the 20th century produced three truly great English comic writers, P.G. Wodehouse, Evelyn Waugh, and Michael Wharton. Interestingly, not even the vaguest hint of a progressive idea between them. I've laughed uproariously at several others, Oprah and Waugh, Frank Johnson, and Craig Brown, for instance, but my top three actually changed the way I viewed the world, rather than simply giving me carte blanche to laugh at the silliness of the great, the good, and that disgusting curse of our age, the celebrity. He wrote the column, Peter Simple wrote the column The Way of the World in the Telegraph for over 50 years. And he died, well, you could say at his typewriter at the age of 91, I believe a day after posting his final column. Now, this is also from the Groenmark blog. And from 2016, pretty prescient, the BBC goes full Peter Simple with one utterly deranged tweet. And this is from BBC Talkback. Why are the royal family so white, given that UK society is so ethnically diverse these days? Yes, I wonder why they are so white. They have royal families in other parts of the world that aren't white. How about the Saudi Arabian royal family? They all seem to be Sunni for some reason and not Shia. Also the Gulf states, their royal families are Sunni and not Shia, despite the large numbers of Shia who live in those places. It's kind of a poser. Grunmark says, my first reaction was, what are they smoking at Radio Ulster these days? My second reaction was one of disappointment that Michael Wharton, by far the major contributor to the Telegraph's glorious Peter Simple column in the 5 decades preceding his death in 2006, wasn't still alive to hoot with derision at such a spectacular example of trendy, ignorant, equality-obsessed, multi-culti media lunacy. For those of you who may not have heard of Michael Wharton, I refer you to a post I wrote about the great man back in 2010. Among Wharton's enormous list of inspired creations, some of my favorites were Good King Norman, the socialist monarch, a member of the Association of Monarchical Workers and Allied Trades, his wife, Queen Doreen, his mother-in-law, the Queen Gran, his sons, Princes Barry and Prince and Kevin, his daughters, Princess Shirley and Tracy, and of course, his brother-in-law, Duke Len of Erdington. Presumably, the staff at BBC Talkback are thinking more along the lines of King Ahmed, Queen Shwanisa, the Queen Nan, Princesses Rohit and Mohammed, Princesses Taylor and Anishka, and brother-in-law Duke Jazzy J of Hackney. Simple, he noticed early how vulgar the royal family, the Windsors as they call themselves amusingly, have become. And I suppose it started even before this woman, Sarah Ferguson, married into the royal family. She married Randy Andy. For some reason, the royals decided they were going to start marrying commoners, even commoners as grossly unsuitable as Prince Andrew's wife. And there were interviews attempting to humanize them. I suppose a nadir would be the Prince Edward organized It's a Royal Knockabout. But apparently the royal family thought that it would be rather a coup for them to incorporate this American grifter, Megan Mertz. Many of us saw at the time that this was going to end in tears. But the royal family was quite chuffed that they were becoming multi-culti themselves. Now, of course, they are accused of the direst sin of our age, which, of course, is racism. Back in 2001, Peter Simple wrote, What is racism? It is a term of quite recent coinage, a term which should never be used except between inverted commas. It is a term which might have stood merely for the natural, universal, and probably ineradicable antipathy or suspicion between different races and the belief that, as everybody knows, they are not all equal in all respects. But it has acquired or has been supplied by interested parties with a powerful strain of Nazi evil, and so has come to mean racial hatred leading to violence and mass murder. A mere human failing has been turned into the greatest of contemporary sins, moreover, one which is commonly ascribed only to white people. And just a reminder that Peter Simple, around 50 years ago or so, invented the term race relations industry. Here's Peter Simple again. From roughly about the same time, research workers in the race relations industry are continually expanding and refining the basic concept of racism on which this mighty industry depends. Thus, unconscious racism, vicarious racism, secondary racism, and most important, institutional racism have all in turn been isolated and defined. 2 years ago, in a sensational breakthrough, the great philosopher of police racism, John Grieve, then head of the Metropolitan Police's Racial Task Force, discovered passive non-racism, a particularly subtle form of racism, which some scientists think may prove to be the missing weak force in the long-sought grand unified field theory of racism. Now the Police Complaints Authority has introduced unwitting racism. This is found in cases where a police officer cannot be found guilty of direct discrimination and so subject to dismissal from the force. Whole patterns of his behavior must be examined before deciding that he is truly motivated by racism. So vast new fields of research are continually being opened up and more police manpower and resources employed to the greater glory of the industry. Is this, many are asking, why the police seem unwilling to use the wonderful new tool which technology has placed in our hands, the racial prejudometer? Invented and manufactured by the West Midland firm Ethnic Aids, the prejudometer is a compact, easy-to-operate device which fits easily in pocket or handbag. You simply point it at any person you suspect of racism, including yourself, press the easy-to-find action button, and read off the result in Prejudons, the internationally recognized scientific unit of racial prejudice. It is a mystery why it is not used universally in Britain today, where racism is second only to sex as a continual preoccupation. Is this because of our all-too-common fear of science and technology, or is it because vested interests ensure that the old-fashioned time-wasting ways of doing things persist? Peter Simple later clarified that there was one problem with the prejudometer, that it had a tendency to catch on fire or explode if members of minority groups pointed it at each other. From the Daily Mail, Queen and Prince Charles back angry Prince William after he broke family silence to blast back at Harry and Meghan's race claims and insists royals are very much not racist. This is what they would call in England an own goal. It's rather like Richard Nixon famously saying, "I am not a crook." You have lost the battle when you are reduced to declaiming, "I am not a racist," or "we are not a racist." The Duke of Cambridge is the first royal to personally respond to the allegation during his first royal engagement. He defended his family's reputation after being asked by a Sky News reporter, "Is the royal family a racist family?" When asked whether he had spoken to his brother, William said, "No, I haven't spoken to him yet, but I will do." Claims a royal raised concerns about Archie being too brown was the most damaging allegation in the broadcast. Also, the first appearance for Kate after Meghan claimed she made her cry and discussed strained relationship. This is what the royal family has been reduced to, all because of a grifter from Los Angeles, California. Well, they can't say that they weren't warned, but we see that the quest for diversity always ends in acrimony and even hatred. Again from the Mail, Trevor Phillips says Oprah should have asked Harry and remarkably ill-informed Meghan about the prince's own past behavior and remarks on race. Trevor Phillips is a mighty figure in the British race relations industry. Let's see. He is a member of the Order of the British Empire. He is a black man himself and a former chairman of the Equality and Human Rights Commission and a former TV presenter and executive. So he is an authority on racism in a way that no white person could ever be. In 2005, a young Harry had caused a stir himself when at just 20 years old, he dressed up for a party in a Nazi uniform, complete with swastika armband, sparking condemnation from politicians and Jewish human rights organizations. After pictures of the outfit were published, an apology was issued on behalf of Harry for his poor choice of costume. I should note that if you've ever seen pictures of this, clearly Harry did not have a swastika armband to hand, so he made one up with a marking pen. In 2006, Prince Harry was recorded calling an Asian army colleague a four-letter slur that begins with P and ends with I, and the footage was published 3 years later. The prince apologized for any offense caused by the incident. Now, Charles Moore, former editor of the Daily Telegraph, reveals that writer and former politician Phillips contacted him to give an opinion on the incendiary Oprah interview. Writing for his diary in The Spectator, Moore quotes the email from Phillips, who says, quote, "A genuinely interesting question about race would have been to ask the couple whether they had discussed Harry's own past behavior and remarks. It would have been a big positive for them to talk candidly about how they got past that history, and possibly an injunction for people to be generous." Moore then gives his own opinion. Yes, Harry could have helped young white men trying to tiptoe through this minefield. Yes, a good question would be, why are white people in their own country forced to tiptoe through this minefield? And of course, one might ask why the leaders of the United Kingdom decided deliberately to create that minefield. They built it. Douglas Murray, who is a Briton, writes in the New York Post, "America's culture wars are an export that the rest of the world doesn't thank you for, especially we Britons, who are now saddled with a living embodiment in those figures and of those wars in the figure of Megan Mertz. By sending her our way, American culture has fired a woke missile right into the heart of the British establishment. She's a one-woman family destroyer, only in this case, the family in question happens to be one of Europe's most venerable and ancient institutions. For years, Mertz has had virtually no relationship with any of her own family. It seems that she wants to ensure that her husband, Prince Harry, similarly has no relations with his. She has sought to sever his blood ties through the medium of Oprah Winfrey. During their interview, Markle, or Mertz, as I prefer, showed herself to be a far better actress than her minor TV career might have ever suggested. In her 2-hour special, she posed, preened, emoted, and made constant unsubstantiated claims. Worst was her claim that someone in the family had asked Harry what he thought their firstborn might look like. This was immediately asserted by both Meghan and Oprah to be an example of racism. Was it? I very much doubt it. That's assuming that this actually happened, which I'm not going to do. Murray continues, if one of the royals had said anything actually racist, then Markle would have used it to get another wheelbarrow of cash in another one of her high-profile attempts to avoid the limelight. As it was, she relied on innuendo. And this, he goes on to defend the royal family from accusations of racism, of course, a term which is never defined. Never defined. But of course, Douglas Murray is a white man. And once again, he is ex officio disqualified from adjudicating claims of racism. Stephen Glover writes in the Mail, there are two sharply divergent views about the Duchess of Sussex. One is held by Piers Morgan, who has just left ITV's Good Morning Britain breakfast program in a huff. Was it a huff? I suspect he was dismissed. It is doubtless shared by millions of less voluble Britons. According to Morgan, Meghan's contribution to the Oprah Winfrey interview was a diatribe of bilge. He declared with characteristically colorful hyperbole that he didn't believe a word she says and wouldn't believe it if she read me a weather report. I don't know why that is hyperbole. There are many people in Britain and America and Canada who do not believe a single word that Meghan Mertz says. In the Sun newspaper, Glover writes, a Black journalist, Nana Achiampong, wrote, if Meghan is telling you that she suffered racism in the palace, then she did. Anyone who suggests otherwise is not Black, unquote. Well, QED, as they say. Meanwhile, on the Thought for Today slot on Radio 4's Today program, a young Anglican ordinard, Jane Manfredi, also nailed her colors to Meghan's mast. She spoke of the deeper malaise evinced by the backlash against Meghan, who had the audacity to tell her own truth. So there we have it. Many of those who rally to Meghan's cause do so because she is a youngish woman of mixed race, and therefore anything she says must be believed without qualification. And those who question any part of her account, which, it must be said, was delivered with extraordinary aplomb, are written off as old, reactionary, mean-spirited, and bigoted. How did it come to this? There have always been hotly contested differences of opinion between left and right, Christians and atheists, pro-abortionists and anti-abortionists, and so on. But people used often to arrive at these opposing views through the exercise of reason. No longer. Many uncritically believe Meghan's very serious allegations against the royal family because of her background. In their view, it's not what she says that makes her right, it's what she is. I accept, of course, that we all see the world through the prism of our ethnicity, class, and age. But if we do no more than that, if we refuse to consider the facts as dispassionately as we are able to, we will end up with a fractious and divided society, or perhaps even a civil war. Glover continues, despite what Jane Manfredi says, truth is not something personal to us. It's not something we can own as individuals. It's an absolute, always hard to attain, and sometimes even to recognize, but nonetheless the lodestar of any civilized community. Well, as I like to say, the age of reason is over. And England is now, the epitome of anarcho-tyranny. I had said yesterday that the extraordinary rumor, which is a year or so old, that Meghan intended to place her husband and herself on the throne of England, I had rated the chances of that happening formally at 0. Yesterday I said 10%. I've now raised the possibility of this happening to 15%. The royal family, led by Queen Elizabeth, the worst monarch in the history of England, is determined to keep paying the Danegeld to the Markles. And as I said yesterday, paraphrasing Kipling, if you keep on paying the Danegeld, you will never get rid of the Mertz. Again from the Mail, so much for a confiscated passport. Meghan Mertz took 13 foreign holidays despite claiming palace aides seized her IDs. There was the, $500,000 baby shower in 2019. Members of the royal family are not supposed to have baby showers, which are essentially women begging for expensive gifts. This is thought to be infra-dig, but nothing is infra-dig for Meghan Mertz. The Z-Man writes, there is no reason for Americans to care much about this story. Markle is an American, so the tabloids have a reason to cover her, as the Cinderella story still sells to women, especially feminist women. On the other hand, she is boring, and her prince is the booby prize of the family. There was never a lot to sell here on the fairy tale front with Megan Mertz. That was until she played the religion card. Megan Mertz is an octoroon, apparently, so she gets to carry on as an oppressed woman of color despite coming from a rich family and marrying into the British royal family. In the new American religion, all blacks, no matter how fortunate, are noble, oppressed people. The big interview that set this drama in motion was conducted by Oprah Winfrey, a woman worth over $1 billion, who regularly claims to be the victim of racism. The absurdity of the premise should be enough to get the story laughed off the stage, but in our modern theatrocracy, facts are not important. What matters is how much the story stimulates the moral outrage of the true believers in the audience. Because the heroine ticks the right boxes and her nemesis ticks all the right boxes, this story is To Kill a Mockingbird for our true believers. The audience is divided into those who support Markle, the good people, and those who doubt her. This is not just an American thing. The great export of the American empire is the effluvia of progressive cultural norms. This is settled on the Western world like a noxious fog, causing them to ape the moral preening of Americans. As a result, the Brits are having the same drama over this ridiculous woman and her claims to special status as a member of the oppressed. The odious carbuncle Piers Morgan has gotten himself in trouble for taking the wrong side on this. Morgan is a vulgar carny with the IQ of a hamster, but he is well above average at getting attention. This is why he's had a long television career in 2 countries, despite being famously stupid. Success in theatrocracy is about getting the audience to focus on you as the center of the moral conflict, but only outraging the worst elements of the audience so you get some sympathy for the rest. You can see that here with the reaction of Morgan casting doubt on Merkel's tale of woe. That Variety piece about complaints underscores the religious fanaticism at work. According to the story, 41,000 people complained to the official censor about Morgan. His crime was to doubt the story of the sacred black woman. For these people, and most people in Britain probably, not completely trusting a black person is no different than questioning the divinity of Christ in medieval times. On its face, it is a sin against the people and their faith, and the sinner must be sent to the tower. No questions asked. Morgan is professional carny trash, but he no doubt plotted this whole thing as a way to get attention, but the fact that it works is what matters. The English-speaking world has now descended to the point where the managerial class is animated by the worship of non-whites in the same way primitives would deify a shaman. The mere presence of well-behaved blacks is enough to cause orgiastic paroxysms among the beautiful people and those who emulate them in the lower classes. American blacks, of course, are an ideal god for these people. No matter how wonderful the life of a black person, they are always complaining. American blacks are the most bitter and ungrateful people to ever walk the planet. Megan Mertz is the full expression of that ungratefulness. She has lived the very definition of the charmed life, but she is a vinegar-drinking shrew living to make those around her miserable. She is the ideal black goddess for a people riddled with self-loathing. Oh, somewhat of a diversion from this. A woman in her 30s was stalked and apparently murdered by a policeman in the last week, which has caused a moral panic, strangely, about white people. Priti Patel says every woman should feel safe to walk on our streets, as many share harrowing personal stories. And the too many men hashtag is trending. Also reclaim these streets. Oh, marches are announced. This is an example of what Tom Wolfe called the great white defendant. Everyone who lives in London knows about the typical threats on the street, but this can't be voiced for an obvious reason. Now, the prejudometer, as we learned, has a tendency to malfunction or even explode when it is aimed by a member of one minority group at another. And here is just one such story. Again, from the Mail, Andrew Court. Teen Vogue's new editor, Alexei McCammond, has issued a lengthy public apology after racist and homophobic tweets she wrote as a teenager resurfaced on the internet. The 27-year-old penned an open letter to the Teen Vogue community on Wednesday, just days after her decade-old tweets sparked debate about whether her new job offer should be revoked. "What an awful introduction we've had to each other this week," she wrote in the letter, which she posted across her social media accounts. "This has been one of the hardest weeks of my life, in large part because of the intense pain I know my words and my announcement have caused to so many of you. I've apologized for my past racist and homophobic tweets and will reiterate, or repeat, as a normal person would say, that there's no excuse for perpetuating those awful stereotypes in any way." And I'm looking at a picture here of Alexi McCammond. I've seen many pictures of her, and she appears to be as black or more black than Megan Mertz. She's also rather more attractive than Megan Mertz as well. McCammond's resurfaced tweets, which have been widely shared online, include one in which she wrote, "Googling how to not wake up with swollen Asian eyes." Another now deleted tweet said, "Give me a 210 on my chem problem, cross out all of my work, and don't explain what I did wrong. Thanks a lot, stupid Asian TA, you're great." McCammond also used a 3-letter slur and a 4-letter slur regarding homosexuals as insults online, and questioned why an article about baseball umpire Dale Scott coming out as gay was newsworthy. The tweets are dated from 2011, when McCammond would have been still in high school. The furor comes just weeks after McCammond was embroiled in a separate scandal involving her White House boyfriend, TJ Ducklo. Ducklo, who worked as President Biden's deputy press secretary, was forced to resign from the White House for threatening a Politico journalist who wanted to report on McCammond and Ducklo's secret relationship. Meanwhile, in Wednesday's lengthy apology, McCammond claimed that she has dedicated her career to, quote, "giving a voice for the voiceless," unquote. "The last thing I want to do is make anyone, but especially our Asian brothers and sisters in particular, feel more invisible," she stated. "I'm deeply sorry that our introduction has happened in this way, and I'm asking you to judge us based on the work that we do from here on out." She added that she was committed to having difficult conversations so that she was always bettering herself. I'm looking at another picture of her where she's smiling, looking directly at the camera. Beautiful green eyes, a very attractive young woman, I must say. But whether she will survive, Condé Nast, which owns Teen Vogue, says they are standing by her. Usually in these cases, some other evidence of blasphemy is found, and that is the end. And we have more woke apocalypse news from evangelical Christianity. And it concerns a woman called Beth Moore, who is described by Wiki as an American evangelist, author, and Bible teacher. She's the founder of Living Proof Ministries, a Bible-based organization for women based in Houston. The ministry focuses on aiding women who desire to model their lives on evangelical Christian principles. In March 2020, Moore announced that, hang on, before we get into that. In December 2020, she tweeted, "I'm 63 and a half years old. Only children use fractions when saying how old they are. I'm 63 and a half years old, and I've never seen anything in these United States of America I found more astonishingly seductive and dangerous to the saints of God than Trumpism. This Christian nationalism is not of God. Move back from it." Christian nationalism. One has to be pretty far gone in wokeness to believe that such a thing as Christian nationalism exists in America. I suppose there are a handful of people who describe themselves as Christian nationalists in the same way that they are a handful of people who describe themselves as white nationalists. They are, irrelevant. This is from religionnews.com. Bible teacher Beth Moore, splitting with Lifeway, says, I am no longer a Southern Baptist. Because a Southern Baptist must be all broken up about that. For nearly 3 decades, Beth Moore has been the very model of a modern Southern Baptist. She loves Jesus and the Bible and has dedicated her life to teaching others why they need both of them in their lives. Millions of evangelical Christian women have read her Bible studies and have flocked to hear her speak at stadium-style events where Moore delves deeply into biblical passages. Moore's outside influence and role in teaching the Bible have always made some evangelical power brokers uneasy because of their belief only men should be allowed to preach. I wonder where they would get that idea. Wake up, sleepers, to what women have dealt with all along in environments of gross entitlement and power. Moore once wrote about Trump riffing on a passage from the New Testament book of Ephesians, because that's what preachers do. They riff on passages from the Bible. Because of her opposition to Trump and her outspokenness in confronting sexism and nationalism in the evangelical world, Moore has been labeled as liberal and woke, and even as being a heretic for daring to give a message during a Sunday morning church service. Finally, Moore had had enough. She told RNS in an interview Friday that she is no longer a Southern Baptist. Oh dear, oh dear, oh dear. I wonder how they will ever get over that. What does the Bible have to say about this? Well, let's go to the first epistle of St. Paul to the Corinthians, chapter 14, verses 34 and 35 in the Ronald Knox translation. And women are to be silent in the churches. Utterance is not permitted to them. Let them keep their rank as the law tells them. If they have any question to raise, let them ask their husbands at home. That a woman should make her voice heard in the church is not seemly. But what is St. Paul as to the authoritative Beth Moore? Oh, and Nancy French, is it really Nancy A. French? Who is, of course, the wife of David A. French, a noted classical liberal and evangelical. Someone called Sarah Pulliam Bailey had tweeted, Bible teacher Beth Moore split with Southern Baptists, has some woman weathering whether to follow her. And Nancy French responded, the way the Southern Baptists treated Beth Moore makes women who don't even identify as feminists want to burn their bras. She should be elevated, not denigrated. Burn their bras? I am led to believe that this is a conspiracy theory, that there were not women burning their bras. Perhaps there were a few pictures staged for the cameras by ill thinkers, but burning their bras. I'm reminded that Nancy French is the author, the ghostwriter of a autobiography by Bristol Palin. Yes, you remember her from Sarah Palin days? Bristol Palin. She was named Bristol because her mother was a fan of ESPN, perhaps. I find the name vastly amusing because when one considers Bristol Palin's rather impressive physiognomy, the word Bristol, as in bristles, is English slang for female breasts. Yes, Bristol in name and Bristol in nature, as one might say. From the Washington Post, the same Sarah Pulliam Bailey with Michelle Burstein. Bible teacher Beth Moore's split with Southern Baptists has some woman wondering whether to follow her. Please, please, please. For conservative evangelical critics of former President Donald Trump, the past few years have been painful and isolating. But this week, things got personal in a new way. Oh, it wasn't intensely personal for them before? With a dramatic announcement by celebrity Bible teacher Beth Moore that she no longer considers herself a Southern Baptist. Moore, a joke-cracking Texan, runs a $15 million ministry that is wildly popular among conservative Christian women. Again, kids, don't use that word conservative. She has for several years been raising concerns about what she sees as hypocrisy in evangelicalism. On Tuesday, she went further, ending her affiliation with the Southern Baptists and parting ways with the denomination's publishing arm that distributed her Bible teaching. While the Southern Baptist Convention has been losing members for years, it remains the country's largest Protestant group, and Moore's exit has fueled chaos for the denomination, which has debated women's roles in recent years. Caitlin Snyder, a 30-year-old who attends a Southern Baptist church, said a friend from church texted her Wednesday morning asking, "When are we getting 'We Love Beth Moore' tattoos?" Because that's exactly the sort of thing that conservative Christian women would do. They love tattoos. If they studied the Bible and went to the Old Testament, they would find a prohibition against mutilating one's bodies with tattoos. The woke apocalypse has led to a realization among some people on the left that they could be next. And one of those is noted feminist and anti-nativist, or natalist rather, Jill Filipovic, or Vich, I don't know how she pronounced it. This is on Substack. I've written about Neera Tanden and how her nomination may be tanked by Twitter. Way too much this week, but let's go for one more. Tanden is in the midst of Senate confirmation hearings after President Joe Biden nominated her to lead the Office of Management and Budget. Republicans and conservative Democrat Joe Manchin may vote against her on account of Tanden's old tweets, many of which are barbed and condemnatory of Republicans. Those tweets are too overtly partisan, Manchin says. According to Maine's Senator Susan Collins, they show that Tanden has a problem of temperament. All this is, of course, extremely rich, coming from a GOP that supported a president who's so abusive, dangerous, and misleading on Twitter that he eventually got banned from the platform. But that's been pretty well covered. What hasn't been discussed in nearly as much detail is what happens going forward if tweets sharply critical of those in power can thwart a career in politics. Here's what happens. There will be fewer people from disadvantaged, working class, and underrepresented backgrounds in politics. Underrepresented backgrounds in politics, disadvantaged. Is she talking about minorities here, particular minority? Is she suggesting that they have a problem of temperament? Pretty problematic, I must say. There will be less space for those who come to politics out of passion and a desire to make change rather than a desire for power. And there will be an even greater advantage given to plotting world power seekers from the most elite backgrounds who have had little real world experience, a dearth of intellectual curiosity, and a low tolerance for risk taking. Yes, of course, all of the prominent American feminists are like that. They are in no way members of an elite. No. Filipich, I'm going to go with that. Let's see. She has a Bachelor of Arts in Journalism and Politics and a minor in Gender and Sexuality Studies from New York University. She then earned a Juris Doctor from the New York University School of Law in 2008, and I'm told that that is a very highly regarded law school. Yes, you can see the revolutionaries are sweating. They are fearful. Let's go back to Jill's anti-natalism. You see, COVID-19 has led to a situation where with many women returning to look after their children, and the feminists are aghast. Jill had tweeted yesterday, "The reality in our capitalist society is that if you are at home full-time, your husband is your boss." Really, I think American men would be shocked to hear that. And there is no HR department. Should care work be valued much more? Yes. In the reality we live in, are women who stay at home taking on significant risks? Also, yes. And Ryan Landry at the American Sun responded, "Boy, I wish my household had an HR department." Don't we all? Don't we all? Who is going to adjudicate dispute? You expect ordinary people to adjudicate their disputes? And if you go to Jill's Twitter feed, you will find that, I'm glad to have difficult boundary-pushing conversations about mothers and work because the ones we're having now are shallow and often driven by fear of fueling mommy wars. But I could have approached this with more nuance and generosity, and for failing to do that, I am sorry. Jill's line pretty much is that women who stay at home are losers. Yeah, they're losers. They don't write for Cosmopolitan or whoever Jill writes for now. And what is life? What is it worth without a column? And in more woke news, Georgetown law professor caught making abhorrent comments about Black students on Zoom. Yes, so everyone's Zoom comments are now being examined. So perhaps it's best to mumble when on Zoom. Perhaps it's best to just, be like Joe Biden, just to be incoherent. It's difficult to get into trouble when you're incoherent. I end up having this angst every semester that a lot of my lower ones are Blacks. A Zoom call between two Georgetown law professors has gone viral after one expressed that all of her underperforming students are Black. I hate to say this, I end up having this angst every semester that a lot of my lower ones are Black. Professor Sandra Sellers said, happens almost every semester, and it's like, oh, come on. It's some really good ones, but there are also usually some that are just plain at the bottom. It drives me crazy. Professor David Batson is seen nodding in agreement. Oh, and Sellers has been sacked, and Professor Batson has been put on administrative leave. Josie Duffy Rice, host of the Justice Podcast, which examines the legal system, wrote on Twitter that watching the exchange gave her heart palpitations. Oh, God forbid she ever enters a courtroom. I was one of 4 Black people in my 80-person law school section. By the end of the first semester, we were down to 3, Rice wrote. All year, I was terrified of speaking up and asking questions. Sure you were, Josie, because I knew one misstep would perpetuate the idea that we weren't really good enough to be here. I don't believe you for a second. Josie Duffy Rice tweeted, "It is unsurprising that many law professors feel this way, though, because this is how the legal system operates. She thinks Black people are either dumb or lazy, even when smart, hardworking people like her give them a chance they don't deserve. The legal system thinks that too." I responded to her, obviously the only equitable solution to this outrage is for Black students to choose their own grades. I think you all deserve an A+ for your wisdom, courage, lived experience, and for just showing up. Gray Earl on Twitter, he sent me an article from the Columbia Spectator, why an all A's policy is the best response to the COVID-19 crisis at Columbia. Wasn't there an old meme, urban legend, that if you were at school and your roommate died, you got all A's rather? Does anyone remember that? I think I remember it. I was going to talk about this woman in charge of 365 diversity. Do I still have the article? She had written in the New York Times about the Meghan business. And again, if you are not Black, you cannot speak about racism because, of course, Black people can't be racist. And her name is Salah Misha Tillett. And I assumed her to be African or Arab based on this, but I was wrong. Born in 1975, she's a feminist activist, scholar, and writer. She is currently the Henry Rutgers Professor of African American Studies and Creative Writing, the founder director of the New Arts Justice Initiative housed in Empress, Newark, and the associate director of the Clement A. Price Institute on Ethnicity, Culture, and the Modern Experience at Rutgers University, Newark. Tillett was the Robert S. Blank Presidential Associate Professor of English and Africana Studies at the University of Pennsylvania. She was also at Princeton and the University of Michigan. It's an awful lot of different places. Despite being so terribly oppressed, she seems to have done rather well for herself. Salamisha Tillett was born into a politically conscious household in Boston, inspired by the Black Power movement. Her parents, Lennox Tillett and Valora Howell, named her Salamisha, which combines salam, an Arabic word for peace, me, her parents' interpretation of black, and Shah, Persian for king, resulting in her first name being a literal translation of peace, black, majestic. It's hard to imagine that any child given that name would grow up with a swelled head. Upon her parents' separation, Tillett lived in Boston with her mother, and then after her mother was a victim of sexual assault by a serial rapist in Boston, Tillett and her sister, Scheherazade, moved to her father's city of Port of Spain, Trinidad. Scheherazade, eh? Yeah, 365 diversity. Let's take a look at this. It's a one-stop shop, actually. And the race relations industry, it's not your typical diversity training. Well, that is good to know. Why and how to discuss Diversity Day. Diversity, inclusion, equity, justice, anti-racism. The above are often trendy catchwords without results. We need measurable and lasting diversity, inclusion, and equity. Contact 365 diversity to change and improve every aspect, including recruitment, retention, teaching and training, policies and procedures, and practices. Yes, this from, Dr. Kimya Nuru Dennis, who is the founder and owner of 365 Diversity. She said that she blocks all white people because they are incapable of creativity or of creating anything that is worth her attention. I see that she has now taken her, or now limits the people who can see her Twitter feed. Apologies for mixing up the woman who wrote the post in the New York Times with the founder of 365 Diversity. This is from Breitbart. Actress Melissa McCarthy trashes America from Australia as hate culture of racism and homophobia. Not fat phobia, though, apparently. She also praised President Joe Biden, saying that his inauguration made her feel the proudest she's been in a while. I truly didn't think that people hated each other that much or hated the idea of people who they don't even know, she said. I always wondered, do racists know anyone of a different color? People who are homophobic. Do you know anyone gay or bi or trans? Do you know these people, or is it the great unknown? I think the next 10 years of our lives have to be spent figuring out why people are so angry and also checking on mental illness. McCarthy made no mention of the estimated $2 billion in destruction caused by Black Lives Matter rioters and protesters last year, nor did she mention Antifa, the left-wing group that targets conservatives for physical violence. Oh, she also mocked mask skeptics during the interview. I didn't see that one coming. And we're saying there's an up to an 80% chance for this disease to decrease if you just wear this little 3x5 piece of fabric until we figure it out. Somehow that's become an infringement on someone's rights. It's always good to hear from this woman. Yeah, okay, I'm not going to go into that. And let's go to this. This is again from Breitbart. Documentary filmmaker and liberal activist Michael Moore said Wednesday on MSNBC's Live that white people voted for Republicans because they were having a hard time becoming a minority due to changing demographics. Why would that be? I'm going to hazard a guess White people are still, somewhere between 60 to 65% of the population of the United States, and American white people are routinely demonized as witches. So how are they going to be treated when they become a minority? Michael Moore apparently isn't worried about it. But in this regard, I'm reminded of Philippe Égalité, the Duke d'Orléans, who decided to come out on the side of the revolutionaries and ended up losing his head. But I'm sure that would never happen to Michael Moore because he's such a valuable ally. And finally, from John Nolte at Breitbart, one can only imagine what will happen to Minneapolis and other Democrat-run cities if Derek Chauvin, the police officer charged with murdering George Floyd, is found not guilty. We are now learning prospective jurors are legitimately concerned for their own safety. From the Associated Press, one was anxious, worried about high emotions surrounding the case. One worried his family might be targeted, and one was delighted to receive her jury summons, even after learning she might end up on the panel, considering whether to convict a former police officer in George Floyd's death. The person who worried about the divisiveness of the case was dismissed, as was the potential juror who feared his family could be targeted. Make no mistake, the pressure from the streets is going to come to the jurors. Information about them will be leaked by the authorities to activists, and the jurors will be, informed in one way or another that they had better vote to convict, or they will learn the reason why. I suspect a similar thing happened in the OJ case. Let's go back to the chat. Okay. Starting from the beginning. Matthew Gubbins says, Tucker being attacked by the military now. I will be getting to that. Quachilango says New Jersey is the armpit of the world. It was, until fairly recently, the richest state in the United States. That was my belief. Palpicasso 88 says, everything I know about New Jersey, I learned from watching The Sopranos. Jersey Shore is a nice vacation spot, says Glib Medley. Quachilango says, someone stole mine when I moved my truck across the street for a party, and I was slammed the door, and the seatbelt was in the way, and the door didn't really close. What was stolen? Have you skated the Rideau Canal? Not me. I have spent, I don't know, a handful of days in Ottawa in my life, and it was a handful of days too many. The city is brutally cold in winter and brutally hot and humid in the winter. Also, mosquitoes. Halper says, will the Windsors go the way of the Romanovs? KMG, 80% of your audience doesn't care about princesses. That's a bigger story than princesses. It's a much bigger story. Metal Mike says she's the royal Yoko Ono, except Yoko could sing. Oh, wait. Claire Kaw says white men suffering from intersectional feminism cannot defend themselves unless they restore the patriarchy with, wait for it, secular Coronism. Laramie Hirsch says nothing can stop the Markle. She'll destroy the world. If you support the Queen, you ain't black, Jack, says Metal Mike. Okay, let's see. Geez, Heastal, hello. Tune this out completely, even on KMG, says Quachilango. Will Minneapolis burn this summer? Rodney King 2.0, says Palpicasso 88. Well, we shall see. We look to Los Angeles for the language we use. London is dead. Metal Mike quotes Morrissey. You don't think bad King John was worse than Elizabeth, says Laramie Hirsch? The aristocrats had enough power in those days to put him in his place and give us Magna Carta. That is no longer possible, unfortunately. $500,000 baby shower, says Geez He's Tall. Meghan is truly living it rough. War is her. Z-Man has been on fire lately, says Palcasso 88. Texas Feral Hog says if Kamala becomes pres, they'll play race and gender nonstop against any and everything GOP does. Well, she is both black and Indian, dot, not feather. She is a Brahmin, a Tamil, and Brahmins do not suffer opposition lightly. They are the chosen ones, and everyone else must grovel at their feet. I read Teen Vogue for the hot takes, says Palcasso 88. Metal Mike says, I remember when Teen Vogue was about Tiffany and Debbie Gibson, innocent times. Yes, it's all about intersectionalism and sex aids now. Yes, it is. Dan Allison says that Beth Moore is the terror of the Southern Baptist Convention. Here in the South, there's no such thing as a modern Southern Baptist, says MCT. Dan Allison, not my belief. It is biblical. Women shall remain silent in the church, says Rustin Shackelford. Well, yes, I suppose that Beth Moore would argue that, well, St. Paul is completely wrong about this, and we don't have to believe anything he says. I don't know whether she adheres to the more extreme view that St. Paul is not really part of Christianity, or the even more extreme view that Christianity was a cult devised by St. Paul. Beth could become a Unitarian, says Glib Medley. Yeah, I suppose she could. Evangelicals know who she is, a toned-down version of Paula White, says Dan Allison. William Hicks says, in my hometown, the first gentleman's club built there was called Bristol's. Half Galician says, what about Lori Cardoza Moore, the Evangelica? She can join Michael Corrin's congregation, says a Metal Mike. Rustin Shackelford says, Paul Gottfried considers himself to be a classical 19th century liberal. So David A. French obviously doesn't know what that term means. Okay, and let's see, William Hicks says the guillotine could never get through Michael Moore's fleshy neck, probably would just stop cold. And even if it did work, he'd still keep talking. Okay, back to it here. Let's talk about Tucker Carlson. No, before we get to Tucker Carlson, let's have a story from Canada. This is from the Windsor Star, presumably originally from the Toronto Star. NDP leader's brother-in-law in altercation under police probe as South Asian Canadian factions clash over India unrest. The unrest sparked by massive farmer protests in India appears to be spilling over into Canada and its South Asian community, with a close relative of NDP leader Jagmeet Singh at the center of one recent confrontation. A widely viewed video appears to show Singh's brother-in-law pushing a pro-India demonstrator to the ground at an Ontario rally, an incident now under police investigation. The man is also related to Liberal MP Ruby Sahota. A separate encounter at the same event has already led to an assault charge against another man. The drama occurred amid competing demonstrations, angry online rhetoric, and accusations of intimidation, much of it related to the protests that have roiled India for months. While many Sikh Canadian activists have come out in support of the farmers and decried the controversial strong-arm tactics New Delhi has used against them, other Indian Canadians, many of them Hindu, have made a point of voicing support recently for the government of Prime Minister Narendra Modi. Well, as I've been saying for years, intersectionality is the war of all against all. When Jagmeet Singh, who used to be known as Jimmy Dalawal, that's been scrubbed from Wikipedia, by the way, and who changed his name because apparently it didn't sound Sikh enough. When he was a member of the Ontario legislature, he bullied it into passing a motion expressing outrage at the so-called genocide of Sikhs occurring in India. This is what diversity means. Well, one of the things that diversity means, it means people bringing their nasty parochial conflicts to our peaceful or formerly peaceful country of Canada. You know, it occurred to me today that the Marine hymn is going to have to be rewritten, you know? From the halls of Montezuma to the daycares of Fort Meade. Yes, you know, in its almost 250 years of protecting America, the U.S. military now is arrayed against its most formidable enemy, Fox TV host Tucker Carlson. So here we have the command senior enlisted leader, Marine Sergeant, who says that giving women service members adequate maternity leave actually helped them recover and become stronger before returning to active duty. It actually makes us a more lethal and ready and fit force. Yeah, of course it does. Of course it does. How could anyone possibly disagree with that? According to Jason Lemon at Newsweek, Marine Corps Master Gunnery Sergeant Scott H. Stalker, who currently serves as the command senior enlisted leader of the U.S. Space Command, publicly called out Fox News' Tucker Carlson after the host made sexist remarks about pregnant women serving in the military. Pregnant women serving in the military. During his Tuesday evening Fox News show, Carlson mocked the military for its policies regarding pregnant female service members. So we've got new hairstyles and maternity flight suits. Carlson said, pregnant women are going to fight our wars. It's a mockery of the U.S. military. The controversial host's remarks drew substantial criticism from senior military officials. Stalker weighed in with his own thoughts in a video posted to his official Twitter account. He stressed the view that Carlson's viewpoint was based on no military experience. I'll remind everyone that his opinion, which he has a right to, it's awfully decent of you, Sergeant, is based off of actually 0 days in the service in the armed forces. Well, I suspect that there are many people in the armed forces who agree with Tucker Carlson, but if they express these views, they will be cashiered. And the cowards at the top, they're afraid they won't get that final promotion to boost their pensions if they speak the truth. Let me tell where he's wrong. Those decisions were made by medical professionals, by commanders and our civilian leadership. The bottom line is that we value women in our armed forces. Stalker added. Pentagon spokesperson John Kirby told reporters Thursday that Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin shared the revulsion of many of Carlson's sexist remarks. Kirby added that the military still has a lot of work to do to become more inclusive, more respectful of everyone, including women. Four-star General Paul E. Funk of the U.S. Army tweeted that thousands of women serve honorably every day around the globe. They are beacons of freedom, and they prove Carlson wrong through determination and dedication. We are fortunate they serve with us. Major General Patrick Donahoe of the U.S. Army shared a video of a re-enlistment ceremony for a female service member. He wrote, "This is me yesterday conducting a re-enlistment for one of the tens of thousands of women who serve in our Army. Just a reminder that Tucker Carlson couldn't be more wrong." I suppose when it's more than your job's worth to disagree, then you're not going to disagree. Here's a story from CNN from Barbara Starr and the odious Oliver Darcy. In an extraordinary rebuke, the Pentagon and several senior members of the U.S. military called out Fox News host Tucker Carlson on Thursday for a sexist segment in which he mocked women serving in the armed forces. Carlson, who is effectively the face of Fox and hosts the top show on the right-wing channel, ridiculed President Joe Biden Tuesday for saying the U.S. military had created uniforms to fit women properly, created maternity flight suits for those who are pregnant, and updated requirements for hairstyles. Also, nail polish as well. Women lead our most lethal units with character. They will dominate any future battlefield we're called to fight on, tweeted the Sergeant Major of the Army, Michael A. Grinston. Tucker Carlson's words are divisive, don't reflect our values. We have the most professional, educated, agile, and strongest NCO Corps in the world, except for the, obesity problem, say. So we went from, women should be allowed in the armed forces to women must be part of the actual fighting force to women are better at fighting than men. Women are born killers, apparently, and pregnant women are the most lethal killers of all. Let's see. LTG Ted Martin, contrary to what you may be hearing, this woman and thousands of women like her are not making a mockery of our military. You wish your daughter was as awesome as mine. So back off. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 fully capitalized words, including awesome. And of course, this woman's daughter is totally awesome, dude. She rocks. Women were born to kill, and it's about time the U.S. military recognized that. Yes, slay queen, etc. And if you look at military Twitter today, well, the word went out, obviously, to anyone who expects any kind of preferment in the U.S. military, that they better get on board with the narrative that women are better at war than men. Yeah. Never mind all the women that get pregnant every year in the U.S. military and who the father is. Well, the women generally don't like to say for two reasons. One, they often don't know. And two, the father is someone that they should not have had any kind of relations with outside formal ones, because that's considered fraternization and it's illegal. But the rules against fraternization flew out the window when women were introduced into the fighting force. Yes, there's a sarcastic comment from Beltway Sniper. Strong, heroic women like Jessica Lynch will lead us to victory. I don't know. Woke, peak woke. We're nowhere near peak woke. I mean, we could be. I suppose this all could collapse suddenly. But it doesn't look that way at the time. And so Tucker Carlson is apparently the most formidable foe the New York Times has ever faced. This is from Mediaite. The New York Times issued a rare statement Wednesday responding to comments from Fox News host Tucker Carlson about one of its reporters, Taylor Lorenz, who had issued a plea to support women facing online harassment in connection with International Women's Day. In a now familiar move, Tucker Carlson opened his show last night by attacking a journalist, the Times said in a statement posted on Twitter Wednesday. It was a calculated and cruel tactic, which he regularly deploys to unleash a wave of harassment and vitriol at his intended target. Taylor Lorenz is a talented New York Times journalist doing timely and essential reporting. Journalists should be able to do their jobs without facing harassment. Fox News responded, no public figure or journalist is immune to legitimate criticism of the reporting, claims, or journalistic tactics. Lorenz tweeted, for International Women's Day, please consider supporting women enduring online harassment. It's not an exaggeration to say that the harassment and smear campaign I've had to endure over the past year has destroyed my life. No one should have to go through this. Yes, again, you've probably seen the meme. There's a wall, and there's a first panel. The woman is slinging shit over the wall. In the second panel, shit is slung back at her, and she cries out, "Help! Misogyny!" Tucker Carlson on Tuesday, who Lorenz did not mention in her International Women's Day tweets, criticized her call for awareness of online harassment. After commenting on Lorenz's age and accomplishments in her field, Carlson apparently chalked up her success to chance. You'd think Taylor Lorenz would be grateful for the remarkable good luck she's had, Carlson said, but no. Destroyed her life? By most people's standards, Taylor Lorenz would seem to have a pretty good life. one of the best in the country, actually. Lots of people are suffering right now, but no one's suffering quite as much as Taylor Lorenz is suffering. People have criticized her opinions on the internet, and it's destroyed her life. Let's pause on International Women's Day and recognize that you thought female wiggers had it bad. You haven't talked to Taylor Lorenz. His focus on Lorenz came toward the end of a segment in which Carlson took aim at several prominent women, including Oprah Winfrey. She sees herself as a victim too. Meghan Markle, a narcissist. Michelle Obama. When will you get the credit you're so sorely due for all of your remarkable achievements? And Hillary Clinton. Because we didn't hand her the keys to the most powerful country in the world, she believes she's been deeply wrong. Rich people are oppressed, period, Carlson said, his trademark sarcasm in full force. And if you claim otherwise, they will use their total powerlessness to get you fired. You see this attitude everywhere. All of a sudden, the most powerful claiming to be powerless and wronged. Tucker Carlson, apparently he can destroy people with a single segment. Journalist Glenn Greenwald, a frequent guest on Tucker Carlson tonight, was first to criticize the Times reporter on Twitter. Taylor Lorenz is a star reporter with the most influential newspaper in the U.S., arguably the West. Her work regularly appears on its front page. Her attempt to claim this level of victimhood is revolting. She should try to find out what real persecution of journalists entails. Greenwald had previously criticized Lorenz in February after she erroneously accused Mark Andreessen of using a slur during a Clubhouse chat. Yes, and Lorenz had written a shock horror piece that apparently there was this new app, or whatever they call them, called Clubhouse, which allows unfettered conversation. Unfettered conversation. Yes, not fettered by the likes of Taylor Lorenz, apparently. Such pain, the pain. And let's see. Criticism equals violence. When it's directed at certain people, when it's directed at Melania Trump, it isn't violence. When it was directed at Sarah Palin, it wasn't violence. When it was directed at Michelle Bachmann, it wasn't violence. But and I could give many such examples, as Donald Trump would say. Okay, let's. I'm going to skip Machiavelli today. No cheering, because we have Theater Thursday coming up in 13 minutes, and I want to talk a little about dread subject, COVID-19. From the Daily Mail. Italy, Norway, and Denmark stopped giving out AstraZeneca jabs over blood clot fears, despite EU and UK regulators saying there is no link. A woman in Austria died from a blood clot shortly after an AstraZeneca jab. Austria, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, and Luxembourg have halted use of the batch. Denmark, Norway, and Iceland went further, suspending all AstraZeneca doses. Italy paused a different batch after a naval officer died from a cardiac arrest. Italy later announced that a second man had died in Sicily, recently given the jab. EU's medical regulator says there is no clear link between clots and the jabs. Oh, are they going to go looking for a link? I wonder. I rather doubt it. Authorities in Italy refused to grant a license for 250,000 doses manufactured in the country to be exported, meaning the shipment could not leave as planned. It comes as a host of countries, including Germany and France, restricted the AstraZeneca's jab use to over 65s, claiming it was ineffective in the elderly, despite Europe's medical regulator saying otherwise. Scaremongering around the jab has led some Europeans to refuse to take it, with authorities in Germany forced to resort to threatening people who balk at it. That doesn't sound very German to me at all. David A. French, a noted evangelical and Bronze Star winner, no less, he's railing against these darn evangelicals who do not want to get the vaccine. There's no end to the perfidy of evangelicals. First they support Trump, then they won't get the vaccine. What will they be up to next? Apparently, David A. French and his wife believe that people have some sort of religious obligation to take the vaccine. The problems have hampered Europe's already slow vaccine drive, which has been plagued by supply issues and has seen just 10% of people given at least one dose, compared to 36% in the UK. Despite the news that some EU countries would stop giving the AstraZeneca vaccine, France's minister said the country sees no need to suspend its use. Olivier Véran said he had consulted with the French Medicines Agency, which advised him against taking similar action. The greater Île-de-France region, which includes Paris, the northern region of Hauts-de-France, and the southern Provence-Alpes-Côte d'Azur region, were the three biggest infection hotspots, including Varan. Daily numbers of admissions into intensive care in the Paris region were now so high that hospital capacity risks being overrun. This despite a 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. curfew. Now, who are those crazy people who say that lockdowns don't work? Number 10 Downing Street defended the vaccine following the news, calling it both safe and effective, and insisted Britain would continue with its own rollout. The lockdown skeptic movement has made some strange bedfellows, and I suppose one of those on the left would be Naomi Wolf. Sorry, that's Dr. Naomi Wolf to you. She writes, okay, Switzerland, Italy, Austria, Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, Luxembourg, Iceland, South Africa, Norway, Denmark have all suspended the AstraZeneca vaccine. Guess all those media who accepted millions in Gates funding put our lives at risk via conflicted reporting. Get it, everyone. The U.S. government is spending $176 billion on vaccines. In the new stimulus bill, the manufacturers get that money, whether these vaccines are recalled or not. And of course, the vaccine manufacturers were given absolute immunity. They cannot be sued. And what could possibly go wrong there? Let's look at lockdown skeptics for today. New study confirms lockdowns don't reduce COVID deaths. Studies which show social restrictions do not lead to lower COVID mortality infection rates are numerous. We now have another paper to add to the collection, published last week in Scientific Reports in Nature. Is that expert enough for you two? It looks at whether the extent to which people stayed at home, measured using Google mobility data, is associated with COVID mortality in different countries. Here's an excerpt from the abstract. Countries with over 100 deaths and with a healthcare access and quality index of at least 67 were included. Data were pre-processed and analyzed using the difference between the number of deaths per million between two regions and the difference between the percentage of staying at home. After pre-processing the data, 87 regions around the world were included, yielding 3,741 pairwise comparisons for linear regression analysis. Only 63 1.6% comparisons were significant. With our results, we were not able to explain if COVID-19 mortality is reduced by staying at home in and around 98% of the comparisons. The authors add, we were not able to explain the variation of deaths per million in different regions of the world by social isolation, herein analyzed as differences in staying at home compared to baseline. In the restrictive and global comparisons, only 3% and 1.6% of the comparisons were significantly different, respectively. Only 10% of Manhattan's office workers returned to workplace. Reports earlier this week that hybrid working could become the norm following lockdowns has been confirmed in Manhattan, where only 10% of office workers have returned to the workplace. If you don't need to work in your office, and your office is in Manhattan, and Manhattan is one of the most expensive places in the world to live, why can't you just leave New York City entirely and move to a much cheaper, much more pleasant, less crime and filth-ridden city. Church closures unfair to Christians, Scottish court hears. The pandemic has highlighted Christians' irreconcilable conflict between obeying the state and God. A Queen's Counsel has said, as she argued, that Nicola Sturgeon, as the First Minister of Scotland, acted out with her constitutional powers by closing churches. And Boris warned that lockdown rules will look silly if COVID cases keep following. The Prime Minister has taken a political beating from Sir Graham Brady, the chairman of the 1922 Committee of Backbench Tory MPs, who says that lockdown rules will look silly if COVID cases continue to fall. Sir Graham Brady also criticized the 5-week gaps between each stage of the Prime Minister's roadmap out of lockdown. He spoke out just days after England's Chief Medical Officer, Chris Whitty, warned that speeding up the easing of the restrictions would significantly increase the risk of a large surge in coronavirus and more deaths. Ministers are insisting that the government is sticking to its timetable for lifting lockdown, with the restrictions due to be largely gone by June the 21st. Stop press. It turns out that the government is not even intending to end social distancing rules on June the 21st, and that there is currently no end date envisaged for social distancing. No end date. Record 4.6 million people on waiting list to begin hospital treatment in England. This is the highest since records began in August 2007. The number waiting more than a year was 304,000 in January, the highest for any month since January 2008. In comparison, the number in January 2020 was just 1,643. So, when these people die in large numbers from the withholding of treatment, is this going to be counted as another COVID surge, given that 41% of all people with COVID in England and Wales have been infected in hospitals? I rather suspect it will. And finally, on this subject, let's look at Alex Berenson, who appears to be more and more vindicated. And oh my God, all the gnashing of teeth and pulling of hair when he appears on Tucker Carlson. He begins with some good news. A reader had sent him a message. Hi, Alex. I know you are asking for pictures of normal life on Twitter. I do not have an account, but I know you enjoy this. I'm sitting at a park right now in New Jersey on this beautiful, warm, sunny day. The park is filled with kids, including mine, who are all running around and playing with no masks. It is a beautiful thing. Parents are here as well, and the general consensus is everyone is over this. Thank you again for your information on your feed, and I hope this message brings a sense of joy to your day. He writes, Bride Class, a Washington Post contributor who took a little time off from making love to the camera this morning to call for me to be deplatformed. Opinions are for me, not for thee. Berenson tweets, if you can explain how Pfizer-BioNTech group claim Israeli data show their vaccine cut COVID deaths by 97%, when vaccinated people made up almost one half of all Israeli COVID deaths in February, and fully vaccinated people about 20%. Congrats. Elizabeth Holmes has a job for you. Not published, much less peer-reviewed. No actual numbers of deaths or severe cases, no confidence intervals, no explanation of the adjustments for age or comorbidities that must have been made to get to the numbers they claim. Truly science by press release at its worst. Matthew Gertz, who is a senior fellow at Media Matters for America, and who is married to Alyssa Rosenberg of the New York Times, had tweeted, Fox primetime shows booking Alex Berenson twice this week to talk down the effectiveness of coronavirus vaccines. Just a galactically irresponsible decision. Berenson comments, arrogance does not begin to describe these woke watchdogs who have taken it on themselves to police speech. They don't believe in debate or the First Amendment. They believe that they should control everything you see or hear. Information you don't like is not misinformation. By the way, Berenson says, I would happily debate Matt Gertz about vaccines, lockdowns, and everything COVID live. He'll never do it because he knows I know the data and studies better in my sleep than he ever will. Trying to block contrary views is profoundly un-American. There's a story from the BBC. Oxford, AstraZeneca, Denmark suspends vaccines as a precaution. Berenson comments, just wait until they hear what the mRNA vaccines can do. Really, though, the side effect profile of the AstraZeneca vaccine is hardly worse than the mRNA shots, but somehow it has faced much more scrutiny. Follow the politics. I mean, science. And yes, regarding Israel, the data say the opposite. Israel finished vaccinating practically everyone over 70 in January, everyone who could be vaccinated. It looks like about 10% can't tolerate a second dose, and it has more deaths now than before the vaccinations began. But now that it has spread vaccines into the younger population, cases are declining relatively fast. The reason is simple. The vaccines work more effectively in younger people at the cost of more side effects. A significant number of elderly people generate no antibodies. Thus, the epidemic becomes more concentrated in the vulnerable, and the infection fatality rate appears to rise. So before I move on to Theater Thursday, I'm going to take another look at the chat. Hikma Warrior says, Naomi has humongous hair. I remember when her book, The Beauty Myth, came out, and I remember seeing pictures of Naomi Wolf and thinking, wow, she's really quite a good-looking young woman. But the pushback from feminists, in many cases, was absolutely, it's really Mean Girls stuff. That Naomi Wolf was better looking than they were. So Naomi Wolf says that we've been tricked into wearing makeup. Well, some of us have to wear makeup, you know. Texas Feral Hog says, nice Bristols, too. Wachalango says, I saw 100 kids on a playground yesterday, and it was great, screaming and yelling. Good to hear that. Definitely good to hear that. Jaakko Raipala says, I can proudly say that Finland outperforms the Anglosphere in this madness. We have an all-female government, so the Prime Minister is a victim, the Minister of the Interior is a victim, and so on. G.C. Stahl says, Taylor Lorenz burned enough bridges that the misery she's experiencing is to her own credit. Steve says, funny how the cute young female PFC always seems to become the battalion commander's driver. Okay, let's move on to Theater Thursday. And I want to thank, I cannot remember the person in the chat who recommended that I speak about this movie. But thank you to the person who recommended The Guard. The Guard is English for the Irish Garda, which is the national police force of the Republic of Ireland. This is a movie that came out in 2011, and it was written and directed by a man called John Michael McDonagh, and more people are familiar with his brother, Martin McDonagh, who's directed films such as In Bruges and the one about billboards outside of Ebbing, wherever. In Bruges, one of the stars of In Bruges was Brendan Gleeson, and Brendan Gleeson is the star of this film, The Guard. Brendan Gleeson is, no question, one of the greatest actors alive. I have seen him in a great many films, and he has never failed to impress. Let's look at, I particularly recommend John Borman's film, The General, which is a film about Ireland, about crime in Ireland, and about the R.A. Brendan Gleeson was in another John Borman film, The Tailor of Panama, in which he played a burned-out revolutionary. He was excellent in that. And in AI, Artificial Intelligence, and 28 Days Later as well. The Tiger's Tail, which is about the so-called Ireland being the Celtic tiger, is by John Borman. I can't say that I recommend that one. Of course, that has nothing to do with Brendan Gleeson, of course, who never fails to impress. Oh, yes, and he is in the Coen brothers film, The Ballad of Buster Scruggs, which I had earlier highly recommended. So this movie is, well, a warning. Okay, this is an exceedingly profane movie, scabrous, one might say. What does it have in it? Copious, besides the violence, copious drug use, including by the policeman, played by Brendan Gleeson. And it has, a threesome, though it's not particularly pictorially graphic, about this suicide, all manner of blasphemy, talking about cocaine use in a church. But it is extraordinarily funny. And one becomes inured to movies which are supposed to be funny, which are not funny. All of these movies which have adopted the Marvel snark way of approximating humor. I should point out from the beginning that this film has an extraordinarily strong cast, most names of which would be unfamiliar to an American audience, except for Don Cheadle, who plays the FBI agent Wendell Everett. They're all good. Mark Strong, Liam Cunningham, David Wilmot, the great Irish actress Fiona Flanagan, and there is a, Slovenian actress who you might remember from The Wolf of Wall Street, Katarina Kass, a lovely woman. Everybody is good. The movie is well directed, well scripted. The music by a group called Colexio is it's rather spaghetti western-like, and that's obviously on purpose. There is a considerable amount of traditional Irish music in the movie as well. Now, as one expects in movies of this type, we see two prostitutes, and these are really good-looking women, and I suppose that's a movie cliche, particularly of movies of this type, that prostitutes are gorgeous women, and for some reason they seem to be nice and thoughtful as well. But we all know this. We all know this cliche. What is not cliche in this movie, which John Michael Madonna shares with his brother Martin Madonna, is that both of them seem to be heavily influenced by David Mamet. And there is an intellectualism about the characters that one would not associate with either policemen or gangsters. Now, I'm sure there must be some members of the Garda who are familiar with, say, Russian literature. I don't think there are very many, and I'm sure that there are some gangsters who are familiar with the philosophical works of Bertrand Russell and Friedrich Nietzsche, but I don't think that there are very many. In Bruges, for instance, this cliche, which I don't like, that all cops are head cases. You see a little bit of that in this film. But the philosophical gangster, I suppose that it's not become common enough to become tiresome, but I find it very amusing. The film begins with a car racing along a two road, and not a modern country highway. The film is set in the Gaeltacht of Western Ireland, where a great many people still speak Gaelic. So we see these young white Wiggers is the name. Is that a band term now? They are listening to their horrendous rap music, driving at a highly dangerous speed, and they zoom past Brendan Gleeson, who plays a Garda sergeant called Jerry Boyle. And he's rather bemused by this, and he hears a loud noise, and the car has crashed, killing everyone inside it. And so the sergeant makes sure that they're dead, and then inspects the corpses, their pockets, and he finds copious amounts of drugs. And he says that your mammy would not be pleased to find this. You see, he's looking to protect their reputations after death. That they, okay, they were idiots, but they weren't drug users. He opens up a baggie of drugs, which I'm assuming to be one of these party drugs. What's it called? MDA or MMDA or something like that. And he puts some on his tongue, and he professes that it is a beautiful day in a very profane way. And we learn right from the beginning that Jerry Boyle, I suppose, is not your typical sergeant, although certainly the heavy drinking or even the drug using cop has become something of a cliche. Boyle is indulging in the well-known Irish tradition of drinking himself to death. And we see him using drugs, and he confesses that he has tried crack cocaine. And he says that, they tell you that you try it once and you're hooked. And he says, that's just sort of the typical nonsense that they come up with. There's also a very amusing part later in the film that we've been told. Well, we've been told that a shipment of 500 million or $500 million, this is made clear, is on its way to the west coast of Ireland. And Sergeant Boyle says, street value. What do you mean? Street value. And, the point that he's making is, and this is something that's irritated a lot of people, including me, for a long time, is that you hear these large numbers, X amount of drugs seized. Yes, it would be worth that much if the entire shipment was sold in the smallest possible amounts. But that's not how it works. The shipments are sold in relatively large amounts, which are then broken down and then maybe broken down again. Because, of course, the people who are bringing in hundreds of pounds of cocaine are not going to be selling it, baggie by baggie by baggie, because that would take forever and they'd almost certainly be arrested. Later, he finds out that this shipment is really only worth $200 million, and he feels vindicated. Now, we're led on a wild goose chase from the beginning, rather amusingly. Oh, this is going to be like Seven, right? And that, some sort of weird occult-like murders. Thankfully, it does not go down that direction. But there are murders happening in the sleepy Connemara. And so we have a police procedural, except that Sergeant Boyle is... he really actually only trusts himself. He doesn't seem to have a very high regard for the other members of the Garda, and I suppose he has good reason to. Ireland has become an extraordinarily corrupt country in recent decades. Certainly one of the most corrupt in Europe, or even in the Western world. And the Garda are, not immune to this corruption. You see, the movie is very clever in that at first you think that, as Don Cheadle says, that that Boyle is motherfucking stupid. But then you begin to wonder, as Cheadle says, that perhaps he is motherfucking smart. He puts on, he wears vestments, as it were, of sort of blustering stupidity and bigotry. If you are sensitive to racist speech being expressed in movies, you should not watch this movie, because there is an awful lot of it. Don Cheadle is an FBI agent who has been seconded from the FBI to the Garda to intercept this allegedly $500 million shipment of cocaine. And right from the very beginning, Sergeant Boyle is determined to get his goat. And the dialogue in this film is really extraordinary. And it turns out that Sergeant Boyle knows rather a lot about the United States and rather a lot about how American police work. And he says to Everett, "Now I know what you're thinking. You're thinking these men are armed and dangerous, and you, being an FBI agent, you're more used to shooting at unarmed women and children." And Everett says, "Yes, oh fuck you, Sergeant." And later he makes a reference to Waco, that the FBI is more used to burning to death unarmed women and children. Now, there's a very strong feeling of outsiderness in this film. Given where it is shot, that even within Ireland itself, the Gaeltacht is considered strange. It's out there in the West, and the people in Connemara, they respond in kind. They especially do not like Dubliners, but they are not fond of foreigners. Full stop. In fact, there's a lot of this coming not just from the Irish, that American expressions. Why are you using American expressions in Ireland? Or why are you using British expressions in Ireland? You can look at Boyle as a bigot, a racist, if you will. But here is this black man who's come to take over from the local lads. And it's not his country. I don't really know. It's not unreasonable to believe that Boyle wouldn't act any differently if it were a white American member of the FBI. When Boyle is accused of being a racist, he says, "I'm Irish. Racism is part of my culture." It's very, very funny. He's constantly writing Don Cheadle, pushing him to the edge, He says, "I thought black people couldn't ski, or is that swimming?" And stuff like this. Now, there's a surprise about Don Cheadle's character. Well, he says, Boyle is asking him about his background, and he says that he's from Kenosha originally, Kenosha, Wisconsin. And he says, "Do you come from the projects then? And or you didn't have the projects in Kenosha?" And Don Cheadle explains that no, he comes from what you could say is a privileged background, meaning, prep school, Yale, etc. Now, okay. So the black cop, he has to be, an extraordinary figure. But it turns out there's a point to this, that Cheadle is he's a very idealistic man. And it makes sense, because someone like his character, Wendell Everett, with being black and with his educational attainments, he could write his own ticket. Instead, he has decided to join the FBI, which is a position that doesn't pay very well. Apparently, he has strong views about justice and law and order and the like. And these are sincere. And he is willing to fight for them in a serious way. Now, of course, we find out that these local murders are actually tied into the cocaine shipment. And, well, Boyle figures this out. All the pressure is to divert everything away from Connemara. And Boyle he's actually a very clever man, and he figures out why. Why? Because the Garda is on the take, that they have been paid off by the gangsters. And during his tryst with the two charming and lovely prostitutes, one of them asks if she can take a picture with a cell phone. And Brendan Gleeson doesn't have any problem with this. Well, he's being set up. The whole thing was a set up. And so he's blackmailed over this, and he doesn't care. And he's offered an obviously considerable bribe, and he's not willing to take it. He is, in his own way, as incorruptible as the FBI agent, although, he's one of those cops that he breaks the rules, but damn it, he gets results. And you see all of these crime movie cliches in this film. But many of them are, they're approached in a slightly different way, or subverted, as the kids like to say. There is a strange young boy who drives a pink bicycle, which he is attached with a string, a dog to. And it's funny because, that doesn't work. Anyway, this fellow is all over the place, and he finds something in a bog, and he alerts Sergeant Boyle, and it's a cache of IRA weapons and explosives. And so Boyle, he says, you've taken something from it. He says, no, I haven't. Yes, you have. I can tell. You didn't notice any surprise, what was in the bag. And what he had taken was a Derringer, which is a very small pistol, often considered, though it's associated with the Wild West, it's usually considered a lady's pistol. And so Boyle delivers this bag to someone he knows in the IRA. And the IRA man knows that there are some things that are missing too. And Sergeant Boyle, he pretends to not know what a Derringer is. And it's explained to him. He says, what good would that be? And the IRA man says, for killing tiny Protestants. The subject of the Derringer comes up again. I mean, what there was a gay member of the IRA who liked to secrete it on his person. And Brendan Gleeson says, you have gay members of the IRA? And the IRA man says, it's the only way we could infiltrate MI5. Very funny. Now, it also becomes obvious that the reason that Sergeant Boyle is riding FBI agent Wendell Everett so hard is that he is determined to suss out, sorry for the English usage there, his character, to determine what kind of man he is, to determine whether he's a man that can be trusted. And so the movie comes near to an end where it looks as if that Sergeant Boyle is going to take on the gangsters by himself. But of course, this is not only as another young boy says, that this is a buddy story, fish out of water, and we know what happens in films like that. But you see, for this kind of approach to work, it has to be sincere. It has to be well earned. And it very much is in this film. I mean, you get to the Die Hard films. The first two, they work. But after that, it's simply by the numbers, and we know everything that's going to happen before it happens. And of course, we know that Bruce Willis is not going to die, right? Well, we don't know who's going to live or die in this film, and that makes a big difference. I should have mentioned previously that the cinematography is by Larry Smith, who was the DP of Eyes Wide Shut and worked earlier with Kubrick. And of course, the West of Ireland is a very beautiful place, and we see that. We also see a lot of interesting shots in terms of what is being photographed and from what angle. And we see a lot of really gorgeous indoor photography as well, using low light. And it turns out that region of Ireland still has unwrecked pubs, magnificent buildings inside. So I just want to give you some quotes from the movie. This particularly philosophical gangster, an Englishman called Clive Cornell. Now, the fellow who's the head of the Garda, or locally the head of the Garda, whereas the gangsters, well, everyone else seems to be about 20 to 30 IQ points higher than they should be. This fellow, the Garda fellow, he seems to be about 20 or 30 points lower than he should be. It's all there, yeah? And Cornell says, excuse me, it's all there? No, it's not. I've skimmed a couple of grand off the top. What? Of course it's fucking all there. That's the payoff, yeah? We pay you off. You and your pals keep your fucking noses out of our business. That's the dynamic in this situation. Why the fuck would I then cheat you out your money, eh? Why would I do that? That doesn't make any sense. That'd defeat the entire purpose of the fucking interaction. You see, one might say that is Mamet-esque. Eh? Yes, here's another example. Boyle's mother is dying, clearly of cancer. And he visits her at her hospice, and she's reading a book. And he says, what are you reading? And she says, oh, she's reading Oblomov by Ivan Goncharov, which is the study of, a useless man, a man who is too feeble to do anything. And Boyle says, never got into the Russians. They take too long getting to the feckin' point. And his mother says, not even Dostoevsky, no? And he says, come on now. He was the main offender. Yeah. Oh, here's the example I was talking about. Who was up there firing the cannon? Boyle says, the FBI lad probably hadn't had this much fun since they burned all those kids up in Waco. Yeah, I really like this movie. I'm surprised how much I liked it. It was fresh. It was fresh in the terms that you don't see very many movies set in Ireland, particularly in the west of Ireland. It was fresh, and the casting is absolutely outstanding. Everything about this movie is good, and I give it an exceedingly strong recommendation. Let's have a final look at the chat. KMG should do Eyes Wide Shut for Theater Thursday. I think I've spoken about two Kubrick movies already. Kevin, what was the biggest surprise death you've seen in a movie To Live and Die in LA? No question. I couldn't believe that. I hope I'm not spoiling it for anyone. I did not see that coming at all. That's from Palpcastle 88. And then the twist at the end, where, a policeman mouse suddenly becomes the hard man. I didn't see that one coming either. Oh, did you like In Bruges, says Anne Run? Let's see. The city is beautiful. The women in it are beautiful. There was a scene with a little boy going to confession, and he was confessing for the sin of being rubbish at maths. That was very touching. There was a lot that I liked about this. There was something I forgot to mention about the guard. There's a very funny scene where the new cop on his first day, and we see that there's a famous cop cliche which is turned on its head there, that a suspect is being interrogated, and he tries to do the tough man act of turning the chair backwards and sitting on it and putting your hands up like this. Only it's one of those molded plastic chairs, and that does not work at all. There's a very good bit of physical comedy. Okay. Your favorite actor plays the priest in that scene. Yes. Okay. Let's see if we've got anything else. Okay. I think that's about it. Anyway, tomorrow is the book club, and I will be discussing a book which is funny. It's quite funny, and it taught me a lot that I didn't know about New Hampshire, which is a state that I have long liked. I suppose there's two types of New Hampshire, besides Manchester, which is kind of a generic city. You've got the pretty places in New Hampshire, and then you got the backwoods, and the backwoods in New Hampshire, they are redneck central, which I didn't know, although I should have suspected it. Anyway, the book is called A Libertarian Walks Into a Bear by Matthew Hungoltz Hetling. And so I will be back on the air tomorrow at 4. Am I speaking with an Irish accent? I have this problem of mimesis, I'll be back on the air tomorrow at 4 p.m. Now I've become self-conscious about this. At 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern. If you like the show or any part of it, I would appreciate it. I'm doing it again. If you would click on the like button and subscribe to my YouTube channel if you have not done so already. If you would like to make a donation to this live stream, which, yes, please do. I really need it. I am at, my PayPal account is at kevin_grace@hotmail.com. Once again, kevin_grace@hotmail.com. If you're in Canada, a donation to my live stream can be made directly via Interact at kevingrace@shaw.ca. And as always, I shall leave you with this. In these days of social atomization and civilizational collapse, I do dearly wish that you, my dear viewers and listeners, manage to forge a genuine human connection in order to ease the burden. Good night.